It's honestly hard to overstate the impact that a proper home theater audio setup provides to movies and games. While it's impossible for me to accurately convey this via my phone's microphone through YouTube compression, I put together a little comparison for you. Check this out. The gap between these two is an ocean in person. The phone mic's not picking up half of the low end, and you can't feel any of the physical bass pressure that I can feel. Also, the channel separation of the sounds bouncing between the speakers isn't going to be picked up, and yet still, absolutely night and day. One is a catchy melody, the other is a full-blown, visceral experience that you can feel. A good system feels like a tenfold increase in immersion, and it supercharges the rush of nostalgia when revisiting your favorites. It was actually surprising to me how much of a difference it made as I upgraded my gear over time, and how much of my memory for the classics was directly linked to the soundtrack and effects, not just the visuals. You see the game or movie in your head as you're remembering it, but it's the audio that brings all the memories flooding back. A lot of you may have never really thought about it, and some others may just assume that it's far too expensive. If you've done any research online into home theater stuff, you'll see a flood of extravagant endgame home theater tour videos that look awfully pricey, or elitist gatekeepers in Reddit threads and YouTube comments setting the minimum cost to entry in the thousands, and probably just assume that it's way out of reach. Thankfully, that's not the case. I'm going to show you how you can get an awesome home theater experience on a tight budget, with a few quick options even in the sub $200 and sub $500 categories. It will be in US dollars, as that's my perspective, of course. Then we'll move on, and I'll show you my modest Dolby Atmos setup and how I got here without breaking the bank or my marriage. Quick disclaimer, people's budgets vary wildly, and not everyone has the same level of interest and investment as others. I don't want to see any disrespect in the comments. Also, I'm not an expert, but I'm hoping this is useful for at least someone out there as a loose guide on how you might consider getting started. Alright, enough of that. Let's do this. Starting first with sub $200. Few home theater nerds' brains just exploded seeing that price point, and yeah, admittedly this will be a pretty quick section dedicated to my specific YouTube niche, that being retro gaming and anime, especially on CRT TVs. If that doesn't interest you, here's the timestamp to the next section. For those that do like retro media like 80s and 90s DVDs, classic anime, or console gaming on any gaming console's 6th generation or older, so pre-HDMI era, consider one of these old home theater in a box all-in-one setups if you find a cheap one on Facebook Marketplace or a similar platform. I bought this Sony DAV FR1 for $35, which my family affectionately refers to as the David because of the model number. It's a complete 5.1 system, so 5 speakers and a subwoofer. And not only is this a great 5-disc DVD changer with 480i component output for my Platinum Complete collection of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I honestly just wanted an excuse to show off, look how shiny it is. But I actually route the audio for my Super Nintendo, N64, and PlayStation 2 into this thing as well, and I let it upmix the stereo sound to a simulated 5.1 surround sound using Dolby Pro Logic 2. I fully recognize that some may call me a heretic for this, but hey, I think it sounds awesome, and it adds a whole new layer to the experience of classic DVD movies, anime, and older retro games. The presence of a center speaker for more intelligible dialogue, and a subwoofer for some punch is really nice. You could also swap in an old receiver and some bookshelf speakers if you wanted, but I personally wouldn't go too crazy. CRT speakers are kind of okay on their own usually, and I mostly just got the David for the novelty of the cheesy surround sound. Moving on to the $200 to $500 category, we're still too cost constrained here if we want a real theater feeling experience, but I have a couple quick recommendations here, as for a lot of people, this is still a lot of money, especially nowadays in 2025, and for others, they just aren't really looking to go too deep. First, if you're just simply wanting to turn the dial up a couple notches on your experience, as well as improve the intelligibility of dialogue and reduce that classic TV speaker phenomenon where you have to turn up the volume to even hear people, then one frame later, boom, it's an action scene, oh god, where's the remote? You should consider a soundbar. And I think this is generally the price range where the only soundbars really worth considering live. I don't say that to disrespect those with cheap soundbars, but generally less than $200, and the product isn't usually better enough than your TV speakers that I personally would recommend buying it over saving your money a bit longer for something better. Amazon reviews are almost always deceptively positive, so look instead at independent product reviews for that specific item from professionals before purchasing anything. Also, you want to make sure you grab a soundbar that comes with a subwoofer. The impact of a subwoofer cannot be overstated, and you do not want to fall for gimmicks like Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos is awesome, and we're about to talk about it, but not from a soundbar. It's all marketing. Second quick option, if you don't have a 4K Blu-ray player or a PS5 or something that needs a 4K receiver, you could consider buying up someone's older complete surround system that they're getting rid of on the used market after upgrading. Just note, these are often outdated in terms of tech and may only pass a 1080p signal, but if you honestly don't care about things like HDR, 4K resolution, or Dolby Atmos, you may find a killer deal here for a full setup on something like Facebook Marketplace. You could always update the receiver and add a couple more speakers or another subwoofer down the line, and you'll have something to use for standard Blu-rays and DVDs, as well as 1080p consoles like Xbox 360, which I feature pretty often on the channel, or Nintendo Switch even, while you continue saving money at least. It's an option, it just requires some research and verification of all the individual items, make it sure it's compatible with your current gear and your final goals. But honestly, some people are going to be happy for life in this zone, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. More power to you, in fact. Not everyone needs a Dolby theater in their house to be happy with their movies and games, but for those looking for more, move on to the next section. Now, before we go spending any more money on a dedicated theater system, here's a quick hint to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck from your investment. You will often get more benefit from proper speaker placement and calibration, as well as cheap DIY sound treatment like these insulation stuffed sound panels I made, than you will from spending more money on speakers. You're always going to be battling the awkward acoustics of your room. And if you're a normal human like me trying to set up a system in whatever space you have available, like how I stuffed my little man cave zone into the corner of my big unfinished concrete basement, perfection simply does not exist in these spaces. Better equipment helps a little, but calibration and dialing things in helps a lot more. So be sure to give this piece proper attention and don't just line things up symmetrically against the wall that your TV is mounted on. Please don't do that. You're just incinerating money and performance if you do. Alright, $500 to $1,500. For those that do want a true theater feeling experience, potentially with Dolby Atmos, we move on to our final price category for today. I'm going to use my personal system as a template to show you the decisions I made along the way to end up where I'm at. For some, my setup is laughably inadequate. For others, it's far more than they'd ever want in their home. Regardless, the information here will enable you to build your own system to your own needs. Also, know that aesthetics is not a priority for me, particularly in my big unfinished basement that's pitch black when I'm watching movies anyway, and yours can look far prettier than the shoddy work I've done on that front. From a performance perspective, though, I've been quite impressed given how relatively little I've spent in total. Many enthusiasts will tell you that this is the minimum you should spend on a single subwoofer or you're wasting your time. but I think you can get a respectable system that completely changes the game for you, literally with your gaming, but also a proper theater feeling for movies and shows. First, we need to start with the brains of the operation, the receiver, as this dictates everything else that you get. Mine is the Denon AVR S760H, and I'm going to use it as an example of what you should look for in a receiver. Right off the bat, in the item's title, we see that it's a 7.2 channel receiver, which we'll come back to momentarily, and it supports 4K resolution up to 120 Hz. Well, I have a 4K 120 Hz TV, and I'll be watching 4K content via Blu-rays and my Plex server, so we need that to be supported. The HDMI 2.1 inputs and outputs are sufficient for up to 8K resolution, so we are covered here. We can also see that this receiver supports the technologies that I personally care about, such as height channels for Dolby Atmos and DTS-X in movies, and the current highest available HDR modes, HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision. The 7.2 channel setup we saw earlier means that it will support up to 7 speakers and 2 subwoofers total. This means I can either do a 7.2 setup, where I have 7 speakers surrounding me and up to 2 subwoofers, or a 5.2.2 setup, where I have 5 speakers surrounding me, up to 2 subwoofers, and 2 speakers mounted above me on the ceiling. This is the baseline I recommend for something like Dolby Atmos if it interests you, as jumping up to something like a 9.2 receiver for 4 ceiling speakers for better Atmos effects costs a fair bit more and isn't something I'd recommend trying to squeeze in at this price point. We'd give up too much money in our budget for it. Don't worry too much about wattages stated by the receiver. If you're buying a good product like a Denon or Marantz or Onkyo, it's probably sufficient. But if you're buying some random oddball used speakers, it's always good practice to look up the specific model number and make sure they don't have a weird impedance rating of like 4 ohms, or they can only handle 25 watts or something. It's not going to be a common issue if you're buying fairly mainstream products, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but always verify compatibility if you're buying random stuff is all I'm saying. This receiver is still on sale for $350 renewed, which is the price I paid years ago, but it's a fine receiver. There may be a better option with the same features at a better price these days. You can look into that, but now you got the gist of what to look for, even if you're browsing the used market. We're all set now to proceed to the next step. Next, we're going to want some speakers for your setup, so we have a few directions we can go on that. We need to end up with 7 total passive speakers in this example Dolby Atmos setup. Passive meaning our receiver powers them, they don't power themselves. Those would be powered speakers, which we do not want. Our center channel, probably being the most important speaker, as well as the left and right speakers in the front, the left and right speakers for your surrounds, and 2 ceiling speakers, which do not and probably should not be actual in-ceiling speakers at this price point. They tend to be lackluster if they're cheap and finicky to aim properly, and they require boring big holes in your ceiling. We will instead choose the better bang-for-the-buck bookshelf speakers, mounted on the wall or ceiling. Just use some cheap speaker mounts. Don't tell me you can't mount them. It's a couple screw holes, man. You can patch it later. Tell your wife I said that. My number one recommendation for sourcing speakers for your setup on a budget, to the dismay of some perhaps, but this is a budget-focused video, man, so we gotta deal with it. It's the used market. Speaker technology has not really changed all that much over the years, so a reasonable set of bookshelf or tower speakers from 5 to 10 years ago, if it's in good physical condition and it's not visibly disintegrating from poor care or environment and you can test them before you buy them, they're probably fine. Make sure the speakers are made to pair with a standalone receiver though, as some of those home theater in a box speakers, like the ones I mentioned earlier for the David, they have some weird impedance ratings or proprietary connections and they will not work with your receiver. They require their original receiver to function properly in those cases. If you can get away with floor standing or tower speakers in your space, I do like those and recommend grabbing a used pair. If it's from a trusted budget brand like Polk Audio, Klipsch, Fluence, etc., for your front left and right channels at minimum, and hell, if you're feeling wild, you could even do your left and right surround channels with those, I guess, if you want. They tend to be a great value, and they can handle a little bit more deeper frequencies than some of the smaller, budget-focused bookshelf speakers can. But in the absence of good tower speaker values, you can look at passive bookshelf speakers. If you don't want to go used, for a super budget new option, you could look at something like Mica's MB42s, which I actually use right now as my left and right surround speakers. I have them mounted on the ceiling because I have 3 wild animals under the age of 6, my beloved children, who will and have stuck toys into my speakers' portholes. If you don't, throw them on cheap speaker stands next to your listening chair or couch. For a nicer but still budget option, you can start looking at things like Polk XT20s, those are alright. But I think the best budget-focused speaker company on the market right now is RSL, or Roger Sound Labs. They have some very intriguing bundles that include a subwoofer and sets of matching speakers, so you get the same sound signature around the room, also called timbre matching, instead of mismatching random used speakers. It's not the end of the world, but it's good to timbre match when you can to blend the sound better as it passes between the speakers, and the quality of RSL products typically outpaces that of anything up to almost twice their price, if you have the extra to spend here. Still very much in the budget category, and definitely something to consider. For my setup, I actually purchased a bundle from Facebook Marketplace for $500 that had 5 Fluence speakers, a small Sony subwoofer, a 720p resolution projector, and a screen. I sold off the little sub, the projector, and the screen for a couple $100, so all in, I had a 5.0 speaker setup for around $300. Then I snagged the Mica MB42s I mentioned to make it 7 total speakers for under $400. They are not the fanciest speakers on the market, far from it, but I'm not the fanciest man on the market, so I don't need audiophile-grade equipment. Speakers, again, have been slow to change in terms of design and innovation, so mine can be resold later as a decent product around the same price I bought them for, should I want to upgrade in the future. Again, that's something to consider. So, we've got our speakers, but let's not forget the subwoofer. And yes, you need a subwoofer. Subwoofers plural if you're ready to get serious, as without at least one, you're missing like half the sound and nearly all of the impact that your system should be producing. Multiple subs isn't for double the bass, blow your house apart like you may be thinking. It's not an insane recommendation. Instead, it's to strategically place in 2 separate locations to even out the bass frequencies in your room. Subwoofers are notorious for making super boomy spots as well as super dead spots in rooms. It's unavoidable that you're going to fight this in nearly any space, and multiple subs helps a lot with this. Look up the subwoofer crawl for a crude way to find good spots to place your subs. It works pretty well. My ideal placement ended up being stacked on top of each other in the corner. That's not typical, but I never would have known that had I not measured things with an app and done the subwoofer crawl. We want as much impact and punch from our system as possible at the lowest cost, and at least one decent sub is going to pay dividends in that pursuit. Now, I don't like buying used subs as much as the speakers. Cheap subwoofers are pretty notorious for having issues over time with their plate amps, particularly our deceptively marketed copper-colored friends, as well as Monolith brand subs, which measure really well. They have crazy output, but the reviews don't lie. They tend to die after just a few weeks. I wouldn't waste your money. Aaron's Audio Corner did a few shootout comparison videos between a bunch of budget subs that are worth checking out. But in terms of value for money, after extensive research, I initially landed on Dayton Audio sub 1200s, which unfortunately appear to be out of stock on Amazon and Parts Express currently, even after a price increase to $199. On sale, I was seeing them as low as like $150 for the holidays, but if you're spending this little on a subwoofer, understand that you are making some compromises, and I don't know that I personally would buy them again, given the next option that I'm now going to bring up. That said, for those looking to just add some rumble, and you still want dual subs for more even response across the room, this is a solid enough choice that you'll be able to grab for under $400 if and when it's back in stock. I ended up selling my dual Daytons once I discovered a new product being offered, again, by RSL, who are most well known for their subwoofers, specifically their Speedwoofer 10S Mark II, considered by many to be the best value for money subwoofer on the market for years at $449. Those mad lads over there somehow cut that sub down a bit and introduced the Speedwoofer 10E for $299 a piece. And after making the swap to this thing from the Daytons, and after comparing it to my dad's Klipsch subwoofer, it's night and day. These things pound you with bass that you can feel, not just hear. At this price point, I'd now recommend grabbing dual Speedwoofer 10Es if you can stretch your budget for it, or a single 10E now, and another one later if you want to push it a bit further down the road. It blows all the Polk and Klipsch subs away, at least in this relative price point, and quite a bit higher, honestly, with deeper bass extension and superior output. It's not close. And unless you want a super inexpensive sub, which is not a super advisable place to cut cost, just skip all the other options. So, all things counted, I was at about $350 for my receiver, $380 for the speakers, and I started out at $360 for the subs with the Daytons. That puts my initial audio setup at $1,090. With tax and speaker wire, which you will need, we'll say $1,200. Not bad to start, and I can say with confidence now that grabbing the dual Speedwoofers, it's a net increase of cost of about $300. It made the biggest difference to the overall experience thus far. I recommend it if you can afford it and you want dual subs, or you can even look at their Speedwoofer 12S if you just want one humongous sub and you also feel inclined to test the structural integrity of your home. Separately, you could just consider grabbing a receiver, the 5.1 bundle from RSL, and a couple more budget speakers for your Atmos channels, and you'd still be under $1,500, and you could grab another subwoofer down the road if desired. You can split it all sorts of different ways now that you have the knowledge on how to piece it together. So that's it, a guide to budget home theater. This isn't a system that's going to impress any seasoned home theater gurus, but that's not who this video is for. For the average Joe that doesn't want to commit all of their excess money into just one of their many hobbies, this final system will crucify any soundbar on the market purely due to the physics of having so many large speakers on a dedicated receiver. If this helped you out, let me know in a comment, and if you're into retro gaming, consider subscribing. Thanks.